Finally, the time has come to paint a more realistic picture of a supposedly great emperor who has been stylized mostly by the Christian Church to have been excellent for the Roman Empire, but who in reality would do incredible damage to the very fabric of Rome. I hope I will be able to convince you that, contrary to common belief, it was Theodosius and his deeds that would greatly contribute to the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Very often the emperors that were supposedly great, such as Constantine or Justinian, were only great for a select group of people, but absolutely not great for all others. I have already analyzed Constantine and Justinian in these two videos, and exactly as with those two emperors, Theodosius has also been made great by the Christian Church, because he enacted many pro-Christian policies, but for all non-Christians, nay, even for the wrong kind of Christians, he was an absolute disaster and possibly the most intolerant Roman emperor. But history is written by the victors, and we know that Christianity did prevail not only over Greco-Roman polytheism, but also over all other forms of Christianity, such as Arianism. They were all extinct, and Theodosius played a crucial role in that act of utmost religious intolerance. After the defeat of Valens at the catastrophic Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, the Eastern Roman Empire was in a precarious situation. The Eastern Emperor Valens had died in that battle, and quite a few Eastern Comitatensis legions, together with many high-ranking officers, were destroyed. After that, the Goths were roaming the Balkans, plundering and sacking many cities completely unhindered. It was then that the choice for the new Eastern Roman Emperor fell on Theodosius, who had won renown as a military commander against the Sarmatians. Upon becoming emperor in early 379, he immediately recruited as many people into the ranks of the Eastern Roman army as he could, even farmers and miners. Even mutilating oneself would not be enough anymore to evade this mass conscription. But here already he made the first big mistake. Greedy to recover the lost men of Adrianople, he recruited a lot of Gothic mercenaries into the Roman army, so-called foederati, barbarians in the service of Rome. While it might have seemed like a good idea to recruit Gothic deserters into the Roman legions, he should have known that having Goths fight against Goths might lead to some problems. Thus, in 380 AD, he suffered a defeat against the Goths exactly because his Gothic foederati had problems killing their own kin, and thus the Goths roaming the Balkans could not be defeated. They were not driven out of Roman territory and were settled in Thrace 2 years later, where they would stay for about 20 years, nominally fighting for Rome, but in reality establishing a de facto independent kingdom on Roman territory. This would already set the dangerous precedent of Germanic tribes being allowed to establish their own domains within the Roman Empire, which would some decades later send the Western Roman Empire into the downward spiral which would see its dissolution. Also, it would tell the other barbarian nations that settling within the Roman Empire had become a real possibility, encouraging others to try the same. But where Theodosius failed with the Goths, he was victorious against the usurper Magnus Maximus. As so often in Roman history, it was again Britannia where a new powerful usurper would spawn, and Maximus was proclaimed emperor by the Britannic Roman troops in 383. After a few years of stalemate, Theodosius was able to defeat Maximus at the Battle of Poetovia in 388, afterwards executing Maximus. But as you can imagine, the Western legions lost in that battle were not recovered. This civil war would already weaken the Western Empire, draining it of vital troops that would have been direly needed 20 years later, when massive amounts of barbarians would start pouring into the West. In 390, a disputed event took place where supposedly Theodosius ordered the massacre of thousands of civilians in the Hippodrome of Thessalonica. But there is only one source for this event, namely Sozomen's Historia Ecclesiastica, which he wrote some 50 years later. But Theodosius' involvement is contested, and so we must analyze this event in another video, but we cannot prove that he really was involved, so I want to be fair here, we cannot hold such a disputed event against him. And if you want to support this channel but you think that Patreon or YouTube membership doesn't give you enough benefits, then please support the sponsor of this video, Skillshare. Skillshare is a unique online learning community with thousands of online classes across 150 countries that enables you to learn new skills in a fun way. You want personal growth? You want to acquire new skills for your business? On Skillshare you can find classes for anything, from learning how to edit, to the art of illustration, to programming and much more. Skillshare has it all. I wanted to learn some new editing tricks, and so I watched Jordi Vandeput's Skillshare course, Advanced Video Editing with Adobe Premiere Pro. This is an excellent course where you can really learn all the functions of Adobe Premiere Pro, which is the program with which I edit all the videos for this channel. So if you want to start your own YouTube channel or make a cool video about Roman history, Jordi Vandeput's course on Skillshare would be the ideal place to start. He explains it super nicely in 34 short lessons, each only a few minutes long, and after taking the whole course you will really know how to edit videos. You can do the same or something similar by using this special Maiorianus Skillshare link here, which you can also find in the description. You then get a 1-month free trial offer for Skillshare. But don't hesitate for too long, because this offer is only valid for the first 1,000 people. And by using this link, you at the same time also support this channel here. Julius Valerius Maiorianus would be proud. Gratias tibiago, amici. But what we absolutely can hold against Theodosius is that it was him who made the Frankish general Arbogast Magister Militum of the West in 391 AD. This was already the first instance, even before Stilicho later became Magister Militum of the West, that a barbarian would gain the highest rank of the Western Roman army, which would again set a dangerous precedent. Theodosius recruited disloyal Goths into the Roman army who would prove to be very unreliable. He would allow the first barbarian kingdom on Roman territory, and it was also him who would allow the Western Roman army to be led by barbarian generals. Thus, Theodosius played a pivotal role in a dangerous process where the imperial Roman hierarchy would be more and more dominated by people of Germanic descent, which would directly lead to someone like Ricimer rising in the 450s, who would then play a crucial role in the downfall of the Western Empire. Because already 1 year after Theodosius withdrew from the west to Constantinople, so in 392, the Western Emperor Valentinian II committed suicide, very possibly having been driven to this deed by the Magister Militum Arbogast. And Arbogast proved very disloyal because he would nominate Eugenius, a Roman rhetorician who resided in the Eternal City, to become new Western Roman Emperor. And this would again lead to civil war. We will talk about Eugenius in another video, because he certainly is very underrated, as he was a religiously very tolerant emperor who would restore Greco-Roman polytheism in the West. Under him, the Roman temples of old were allowed to be opened, the flame of Vesta in the Forum Romanum would burn again, and the old worship would be practiced openly for the last time. But it was not to last, because in 394 the fate of the world was decided at the Battle of the Frigidus River. I will make a full video about that battle, because it is often overlooked and is extremely important. Eugenius and Arbogast lost, and again as in 388 against Magnus Maximus, many Western Roman legions were destroyed, many Western Roman soldiers died, and their ranks were never replenished. So these civil wars were disastrous for the West, and Theodosius played a big role here in destroying many Western legions. The Western Empire would have direly needed those legions 12 years later, and I think that had they been still alive, the Western Roman Empire might have survived. But even though Theodosius won the Battle of the Frigidus River, he committed another terrible mistake. After the defeat of 380, where the unreliable Gothic foederati were responsible for his defeat against the Goths, he never fully trusted them again. So what did he do? In that very battle, he sent the Goths forward to attack Eugenius' and Arbogast's army, where over 10,000 Goths were killed. So even though Theodosius won, many Goths died in the Battle of the Frigidus River, which would understandably cause great resentment within the Gothic ranks against the Romans for such an outrageous treatment. And this is what would directly lead to Alaric and his revolts against the Romans, which would directly culminate in the sack of Rome of 410 and the establishment of the Visigothic kingdom some years later in Aquitania. The groundwork for that was laid by Theodosius himself at the Battle of the Frigidus River, by his inhumane treatment of his Gothic foederati. These were all some pretty bad deeds already, but in no area was he as intolerant and brutal as regarding the practice of religion. Because we often think that the Greco-Roman polytheism was already in decline under Constantine, and that the so-called pagans, which is by the way a derogatory term invented by Christians, converted to Christianity out of their own free will. but in reality it was Theodosius' laws who would outright ban the worship of the old gods on penalty of death, which would de facto seal the fate of the old Greco-Roman faith. After his victory over Eugenius in 394, he had all the old temples closed in the Western Roman Empire, even Rome itself, where the population was still predominantly pagan. This would lead to many religious riots, where many pagans and Christians alike would die in violent clashes. Most notorious of those were the ones under Augustinus of Hippo in Carthage and the ones in Alexandria. The latter were especially brutal because not only many people died, but the beautiful Serapion of Alexandria was destroyed and in the aftermath replaced by a much less impressive church. Many other pagan temples were plundered and desecrated, afterwards left to gather dust, and when they would start to crumble, often looted for building material. Later emperors would build on the intolerance of Theodosius and enact even harsher laws against the old Greco-Roman polytheism. The culture war and polarization by these intolerant laws possibly aided the fall of the Western Roman Empire, because instead of uniting against the invaders, the people were now busy with religious wars, fighting against each other. To make it even worse, Theodosius then died in 395, and of course he's certainly not to blame for that, but he is to blame for the fact that prior to his death, he had made his two young sons, Honorius and Arcadius, co-emperors in order to succeed him. Unfortunately though, Honorius was 11 years old in 395 and Arcadius 18, and both were very incapable. In fact, the actions of both, but especially those of Honorius, would turn out to be disastrous for the Western Roman Empire, and we can thank Honorius in large parts for the dissolution of the Western Roman Empire. The grandson of Theodosius, Valentinian III, proved not much better, and those two weak emperors of the line of Theodosius, Honorius and Valentinian III, would reign an incredibly long 60 years in total, in a time where good emperors would have been direly needed. Had an Aurelian or Maiorian sat on the throne instead of Honorius, the history of the Western Roman Empire would have certainly turned out very differently. I know there are many Honorius apologetics out there, but I maintain my view that his actions were disastrous for the Western Empire, and I explained my reasons in this video here. In the East, Arcadius' inaction and weakness also came at the worst possible time, because the West would have needed strong assistance in these times. So it was Theodosius, the supposedly great, under whose watch the foundations for the fall of Rome were laid in great parts. He accelerated the barbarization of the Roman army with his Gothic foederati. Then he allowed the Goths to establish a kingdom on Roman territory. Then he massacred his own Gothic foederati at the Battle of Frigidus, which would lead to the sack of Rome. Then he was responsible for the death of massive amounts of Western Roman soldiers, thus greatly weakening the Western Empire. He was a religious fanatic, extremely intolerant against the old worship, but also against other forms of Christianity. Many Arians were killed on his orders. And he was responsible for placing his two inept sons onto the Roman throne in such a dire time. Thus for me, Theodosius absolutely does not deserve the name great. He was really only great for some early Christian fanatics, but absolutely not great for the Roman Empire. And please like this video and subscribe so that you won't miss any future videos on the fascinating era of the late Roman Empire. And please consider supporting my work on Patreon or via YouTube membership, because the long-term sustainability of this channel really depends on your support. Seriously, this channel would not work without our Patreon and YouTube members, and I want to thank each and everyone who is supporting this channel in any form. Gratias tibi ago, amici. And if you're interested in learning more about how exactly the Western Roman Empire fell, you can watch this video here in the upper right corner. But if you are more interested in the late Roman army, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibi ago, and bene valete.